Okay, everyone. Thank you all for coming to our Industry Insights panel tonight. We're going to be talking about first steps to career success and how all you underclassmen can get ready and be prepared for your career journeys. So I'd like to thank you guys all for attending and thank you to our panelists for being here. I'm Alex Higa. I'm one of the employer engagement interns at the Career Center. I'm also a junior studying accounting and finance. Um, so yeah, here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to start by introducing two of our panelists, and then we'll jump into a panel discussion. I'll lead a little Q&A session, and then at the end, students will be able to um, share their own questions and have them answered by our amazing panelists. And then right at the end, I'll close it out and give you a little insight into upcoming events at the Career Center. Great. So we're going to start with our panel introductions, our panelist introductions. And we can start with McCarthy, if you could tell us a little bit about your background in school and work as well.
Hi everyone, I'm McCart. Oh, can you guys all hear me? Does that? Okay.
You're good.
Hi everyone, I'm McCarthy. I'm a senior and I'm studying computational neuroscience with a minor in management consulting. I'm interested in the intersection of science, healthcare, and business. And so this past summer, I did healthcare consulting at Protiviti. And then the summer before, I was a student research intern at Barrow Neurological Institute.
Hey everyone, my name is Divya and I'm currently a first year medical student at Columbia. I graduated USC in 2024 and I took one gap year. And over my gap year, I did colorectal cancer research at UCSF. And yeah, now I'm here.
Awesome. Our other two panelists, Daniel Kong, he is a senior here at USC. We'll introduce him as he joins the call, and Amelie Missig, she is another senior here at USC, and she'll be joining a little later to share her insights as well. But we can jump in right into questions before they join, and I'll let you guys know when they do. Um, we'll start with we'll start with McCarthy, and then Divya, you can add your thoughts after her. My first question is, how did you guys start figuring out what careers might be good for fit for you when you guys were in college?
I initially did begin as pre-med but I wasn't like set on it. That's just kind of what my track was with neuroscience. And I really let myself explore all the opportunities within that realm. I joined research labs. I did some volunteering, all the things kind of that people were doing to get to that level. I mean, to like apply to med school and stuff like that. But I found through those experiences that I was more so drawn to kind of the business aspect of things like healthcare, biotech, etc. And so from there, I then tried to talk to as many people as I could who were doing things that I thought were cool, and in places or positions where I might want to be. And it was really through networking and just talking to as many people as I could that I really began to learn about different things and positions that didn't even know were out there. And then that's what got me into consulting this past summer. And that was a really great experience and kind of my first really hands-on grasp of the business side of healthcare. And that's the path I'm going to continue going down. So, yeah, that's pretty much how I got to where I am now. Definitely not linear, but um, I don't think it should be. And I think that's the best way to find where you should be is to just really let yourself explore absolutely anything and everything.
Yeah, I definitely agree with McCarthy. I think I was really similar. I think in high school I had figured out that I was really interested in science, and I really liked working with people. So I entered USC as a bio major with a business minor, and that's what I graduated with too. I think upon getting here, honestly, I just like immersed myself in like first classes. I feel like don't underestimate like the power of like a super sick GE that has like nothing to do with like your major, for example. I think through like a lot of those classes, I learned about like the community or like different populations and like learning about them really interest or like made me interested in like how healthcare applies to them. I think really similarly to McCarthy, I also got involved in like a lot of extracurriculars. I joined a lab and did a lot of cancer research during my time at USC. And I also did like a lot of service with the community. And I think experiences, um, like doing those things really affirmed to me and really brought like depth and dimension in terms of why I wanted to go into medicine. And yeah, I think a lot of the clubs at USC were really great for that too.
Great. Thank you both for those answers. And I think that's a really good like launching point to our next question, which is about extracurriculars and on-campus involvements. So what on-campus extracurriculars were you a part of, and what did you take away from them to help you in your job search and career? You can go ahead and start.
Um, I one club that was really influential to me was this club called Neurotech, which really catered to computational neuroscience, I would say. Um, because I did initially start as neuroscience and then I switched to comp neuro. Um, but it introduced me to this like niche subset of people with this similar interest, and every week there'd be new speakers that would come in, and that just really helped me get familiar with the field and all the opportunities out there. And then there were also experiences that I took part in that I ended up not enjoying, but those are important as well because they kind of show you what you do and don't like. So, for example, I began doing research and it was really cool, but I didn't enjoy being in a lab as much as some other people do. And so that's kind of what made me realize maybe that's not something I want to do. And so, every experience I've had along the way, good and bad, have both been very influential, but um, you kind of, I feel, find the clubs that it's just through a lot of exploration that you just kind of find the clubs that stick, and they end up having a very big impact on your USC education, more so than classes often.
Yeah, I mentioned I was like involved in research too. So I was a part of the pancreatic cancer team at the Convergent Science Institute in Cancer. That's in like the Michelson building across from SGM. I think that was definitely like a really pivotal experience for me and really showed me the intersection of like what technology can do to make healthcare more accessible. I also was involved in like a few service and like pre-med organizations too. I was like president of Alpha Epsilon Delta, which is like a pre-med organization on campus. And then I also was really involved in WorldMed at UPC, which is a pre-health organization focused on like healthcare disparities and like education. I also was president of Scholars Leading Scholars, which is a service organization that like makes mentor-mentee pairs with like high schoolers and like us college students to help them apply to college, which was really great. Outside of that, I also was a business analyst with Rice Consulting for a year, which was really awesome and allowed me to like kind of use my science knowledge in different ways and like apply it to science-based startups, which was really cool. And I also was a gerontology TA for a year for two different operative classes.
You guys have a lot of great experience, and I'd love to ask a follow-up question on that. You guys have a lot of experience and you guys have done very well in your academics. How do you guys manage your time, and how have you been able to balance, school and as well as these extracurricular and professional opportunities that you guys come across?
I do find that when it's like recruiting season or you're focusing on interviews and stuff like that for a job or grad school or something that's coming after, I do allow that to take precedent over my schoolwork often. Um, but that is just kind of, I would say, the caliber of a USC student is that we know that no matter what, we're going to get it all done. It's just going to take a lot of work. But yeah, when I'm preparing for interviews and stuff like that, that's usually the most time-consuming thing. But otherwise, I mean, I heavily use my planner. I love like having things to check off at the, knowing that everything's going to get checked off at the end of the day. And so I've always had pretty good time management skills. And yeah, Divya, you might have more on that. That wasn't the best answer, but
No, I totally agree. I think organization is so key. I would say in the beginning, like don't jump into like every single thing at once and like add things on your plate slowly when you feel like you have like the time and even like emotional space. And then, once you're involved, I would say, like I said, organization is key. Like use your planner, your GCal, know what you have set up like every single day. And I would say when you have your list of tasks, like prioritize high impact tasks first. Like if that's interviewing during interview season, like focus on that first. If it's like your exam, like focus on that first. So I think knowing that and also being like flexible to like changes and knowing how you can like wiggle around your schedule to create more time for yourself will come with like practice and time too.
I think those are such important things in my own college career as well. So that's right for me that. My next question is related to networking, and um, networking can sound intimidating if you haven't done it before. So, what's the best way for freshmen and sophomores, do you guys feel, to get started?
Um, I would say, well, I tell everyone that the most influential class that I've taken at USC, and I got a lot of that type of advice from it, is this class that I took in Marshall called Exploring Future Careers in Business. And that class kind of opened the door to me to business because being in Dornsife, I had previously just not had any experience with that. And people would talk about, like my friends and classmates would talk about things like investment banking, consulting, all of that. And I just had no idea what any of that was. But this class taught the importance of networking, and it also brought in guests from just different, like every different type of field in business, really, every week. And they would just come talk to us. But the advice that that class gave that I really took with me was to make it a habit in your week to spend like set aside about like an hour or 2 hours every week to just send as many like cold emails, cold messages as you can, whether from LinkedIn or the Trojan Network, anything like that, because ultimately I attribute where I am now to all the people that I talked to along the way, because that's really what helped me figure out like where I can be and just the things that interest me. And so I feel like every conversation really opens up just some new opportunity. And so I would suggest freshmen and sophomores start doing that. It's never too early to just try to talk to as many people as you can. And the USC Alumni Network is great for that. Fellow Trojans are usually very willing to talk to you.
I like completely agree. In terms of networking, I feel like networking as like a pre-med or like somebody pre-health is like kind of different than it is for like going to industry and I don't know if there are any pre-meds like in the meeting, you can like drop it in the chat or something. But I would say that like cold emailing is like a really big part of it too. Like if you're trying to like find research, like, not every lab like will have their contact information or like an application. Like you just have to cold email them and like tell them you read a paper and you're interested. I would also say for like shadowing, like people like there aren't that many like shadowing programs like that can take like a lot of people, but like emailing physicians and like telling them why you're interested and asking to come for like a day or two or however long, it definitely works. And that's like how I got my lab position and how I was able to like shadow physicians like before applying to medical school too. So I would say do not underestimate the power of like a cold email and like following up too. I would also say like attend talks, like attend events. Like sometimes it can seem intimidating to like go meet somebody who is like so deep into their professional career, but like, they're here for you guys and to like engage with you guys. So after their talk, like ask them a question, like get their email, like just send them like a thank you note or like ask them a question. Like I think all of that goes a long way and helps kind of like nourish your curiosities at the same time.
I think those are really good advice. And I have another follow-up question. Um, you know, on the topic of networking and, we think a lot of it as professionals and people working in industry or in the jobs we want. Have you guys noticed, or has this been a part of your experience where you've networked with peers or other USC students who are upperclassmen and how they impacted your career journey?
I would say every networking experience I've had with a current USC student was not an intentional networking one. It was something I realized after that, like, okay, wow, that really opened the door for this. And I can now, looking back, recognize the types of people I've met, like classmates and peers I've met along the way that have been like a stepping stone or a reason to why I got a certain job or opportunity. Um, but when I'm being intentional about networking and thinking like I want to set up a coffee chat with this person or something, it's usually someone that did recently graduate USC because that's just an easier way to kind of make a connection with someone, for example, on LinkedIn. But yeah, it'll be with people that are in a position or working for a company that I am interested in. And not all of them like hit, but a lot of them can create a really great connection that you can leverage later on for something like a referral.
I feel like I've had very similar experiences too. Like maybe not like intentionally networking with my peers, but like, oh, we're in the same group for like a group project, we're in the same research group, and we spend a lot of time and like work together. And like down the line, like they end up, helping me out or like supporting me during like an application process. Like for example, when I was interviewing for medical school, one girl who is 1 year older than me, but I worked on the same research team with her. She attended the school and I like met with her for an hour and she like told me like she gave me advice for like the interview and for preparation. Before starting at Columbia, my friend from USC connected me with his USC friend who is a second year medical student at Columbia. And we talked on the phone and like before me like matriculating. And I would definitely say like LinkedIn messages and like LinkedIn coffee chats work. Like I think class of 2025 person like messaged me on LinkedIn about they were pre-med and they wanted to like call or have a coffee chat and like I was happy to speak with her. My friend who was applying to like Masters of Public Health programs had like messaged and coffee chatted many Trojan alum who had like an MD, MPH, and he spoke with like many, many people in that like situation. One of my college roommates is applying to law school this cycle and she reached out to a ton of Trojan alum who like attended the law school that she wants or like wants to apply to and they were all like happy to coffee chat with her. So I would say like the Trojan family actually goes a long way and you should like never underestimate it.
Yeah, I feel like that's such good advice, and um, there's so many unexpected and but also like verifiably great ways to reach out to people. Um, and my next question is pretty related to the previous two, and um, it deals with mentorship, and it asks how can students find mentorship opportunities and learn from people ahead of them? And are there any other examples that you guys want to share? That
I can maybe start with this one. I would say kind of like reiterating what we've talked about, like when you join immersive experiences like a lab or a club, or like you take like multiple classes with a single professor, I think like by nature of that experience becoming longitudinal, you get closer to the people you're doing it with and the people who are like maybe teaching you. So for example, when I was in my lab for about like 3 years and I was very nervous to like meet my PI, but like by the time I was a senior, like I knew them very well and like they have provided me with like, oh my God, let me like over 10 like letters of recommendation. And like I think like in that sense, I am able to like reach out to like my mentor if I have questions or like asking about something scientific. And I know my PI will like always write a letter back for me, like no matter if it's like within the 2 week deadline because I accidentally forgot or something, which has actually never happened. I would also say like we were talking about, like peers can be an incredible mentor too. And I think a great place to meet them is like in clubs. Maybe if the club has like a big little program or like a mentorship program themselves. I feel like learning, the experiences of people just 1 year older than you can help you so much in terms of like picking your classes or like know when recruiting cycle starts or learning about this other club that you've like never heard of or even just having people to like study with and encourage you like and like when you're like having a hard time, I guess. Yeah, I would also say like my professors like have really supported me, especially during the application process too. For some of them, I took like a lab and like another class, like two classes with them. So I feel like they got to know me like over the course of many months. I would like drop by their office hours and like hang out for a little bit or like always say hi to them. So I think even through that and these like seemingly small interactions, like they remember you and they know like they're like willing to be there if you have questions or need help or to like connect you with somebody else that they know too.
Yes, I agree with all of that, and I really liked your use of the word longitudinal there because I think at the beginning of freshman year and sophomore year, honestly, I got very excited every time we went to the career fair, and I would always want to join like all of these clubs. Um, but if you're going to be a very committed member of one, you can't also be a committed member of like 10 other clubs. But that's okay to try them all out initially and see which ones stick for you, and what you think the best, like where you feel just the best fit. Um, and it's kind of building those longitudinal experiences and staying committed to those commitments and stuff that you're really going to be able to like leverage their impact later in those connections that you made from that. And then I think the same goes for networking. So for example, like someone that I reached out to, a USC alum who I reached out to sophomore year at a company I was interested in, and I maintaining that contact with those sources are is kind of a similar thing to like staying committed to a certain club and hanging on to those connections because that person that I talked to sophomore year just out of interest is now helping me, just wrote me a referral for a job for post grad. And so it's things like that that really show you the impact of just getting out there early on.
Great. That's really awesome insight from you both. And um, there's so many people at USC who are willing to help, and I think your guys' experience highlight that a lot. My next question is, what are some of the summer opportunities for freshmen and sophomores who might not qualify for their dream internships yet? Like, how can they build experience prior to that junior, senior internship or applying to grad school?
I think again with that, that's a question I feel we get a lot in the like career center panels from freshmen and sophomores, and obviously a job doesn't expect you to have accumulated all of these experiences so far if you're a freshman. So on your resume, for example, it's totally fine to still have those those high school experiences that are applicable to things you're applying for. But then kind of through different like projects and like school projects and clubs and things like that, I think you can really begin to build up your resume and accumulate experiences that are relevant or at least push you in the direction that you want to go. And you don't have to know an exact like pinpoint of where you want to go, but as long as you're just gaining those experiences, I think when you are applying to things, you can really find a way to make any experience that you've had relevant to that position just through storytelling.
Yeah, I think my response will take like a little bit of a different angle for somebody who is looking to apply to like a health science related grad school. I would say like especially freshman and sophomore year, I feel like a lot of things people like, or a lot of times people like to take like classes over the summer, like if they want to finish like the physics series or like I don't know, like the chem series, like they like to take that just to like get it out of the way and like focus on other things during the semester. So I think that was really popular. USC has a lot of like research fellowships and like funding every summer. They have, I think it's like SURF and PERF. Um, it's like they give you like a stipend to do like a certain number of hours of research every week. And I did that like multiple semesters, like multiple summers. And I really enjoyed that. And I think that is like a good way to like expose yourself maybe to like a new lab or like a new whatever like project and maybe you'll like it and like maybe you won't and you'll be like I never want to do this again and you're pushed to like another direction. I think also volunteering is like a great thing to do. I think regardless of like your profession and your field, volunteering is a good thing to do, especially like in the local LA community. But I would say for people who are pre-health, like checking out like a volunteer program, or like on the medical center campus too could be really useful to like get some clinical exposure. Um, I guess when you're more free during the summer.
For sure. And, you know, there's a lot of great ways to get experiences. And my follow-up question is about skills and maybe hard skills and soft skills that you guys feel like you developed freshman and sophomore year that helped you later in your college career because, maybe it's not an experience, but it's a skill or practice that you've worked on early in your college career that's helped you a lot later in your college career and starting in your professional careers.
Um, I guess I can mainly think of soft skills here, and one of those is going to be networking. But another one would be like the time management and organization just continues to be more and more important. Like knowing what to prioritize, but also just because something's a little lower on your list doesn't mean it's not important. And so, yeah, just time management, which you kind of accumulate. That skill kind of grows as you get further along in college. I remember like my schedule freshman year, even if it's the same as now, it just intimidated me a lot more just because of how new it was and all those time commitments. You're just not used to it. And so definitely give yourself grace in that aspect. But that has been a very important one. And as I've had like summer internships and stuff like that, I recognize how that's important too. And what those skills that you learn like from your school schedule definitely translate over to a full-time work schedule.
Yeah, I totally agree. In terms of hard skills, I would say like everybody's taking like your lower div, like gen ed classes to teach you basic skills, and like the upper divs definitely build on it. So I think it is definitely important to get like a good foundation. But I would say like the soft skills are truly what stick out to me too. I mentioned before I was a bio major with a business minor, and I think I loved the business minor because of like the hard and soft skills I learned. You know, like accounting and like finance was something that I was probably like not going to do again. So it was really awesome to like learn it and experience it. But I think like even the soft skills, like how to like be a good leader, like how to communicate effectively and do like public speaking and like honestly so much more was really, really impactful. And I felt like I could see myself using those like leadership skills and qualities as I took more initiatives and took lead in the student organizations I was a part of, like my senior year. Um, I think overall, like taking a step back, I think even just being a learner and like being willing to fail and learn from that was also super important. I think in like the process of becoming like a healthcare professional, like there you basically have to learn all the time and you're going to be wrong a lot too. So I think getting used to that and like trying to be a sponge and learn everything was kind of a great skill that I learned before too. I think the leadership aspect of healthcare is something that like I also see being applied now where I mean professionals like never work on their own. They're always in like a healthcare team. So I think having good leadership skills, knowing how to like draw the team together to like work toward a common goal. Has also been like really good to learn and like practice.
Great. Thank you guys for that insight. And cool enough, we have had our other two panelists join. So Daniel and Amelie, if we'll start with Daniel, but if you guys could share a little bit about your academic background, some of your work experience, and then maybe any extracurriculars that you guys are a part of and think that freshmen or sophomores should be looking at and something you found valuable in your college career. So we can start with Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Kong. I'm a current senior. I'm studying business administration, but I'm also doing a progressive degree program right now in systems architecting and engineering. So just wanted to get that business and technology background. So that's kind of why I chose the academic path. This past summer, I was a product management intern at NBC Universal, so got to work on creating a new tool that's going to be implemented for the FIFA World Cup next year. So excited about that. Kind of in terms of my involvement in extracurriculars, I was involved in a consulting club called Rise Consulting, my freshman and sophomore year. So that's actually where I met Divya. Um, so that kind of helped with the business aspect. Outside of that, I was part of a service organization as well called USC Money Think. And we went to the local high school, which it's called James Fauché Learning Center. Some of you guys might know of it, but we went there twice a week to go ahead and teach financial literacy to high schoolers around the greater Los Angeles area. And I think kind of having both a business and a service organization helped me gain aspects not just pre-professionally, but also in a field that I was genuinely interested in as well.
I can go next. Hi, I'm Ame Lee. I'm also a senior studying business with a minor in applied analytics. I've done so many different internships in a variety of spaces. I was at Public Consulting Group, which is like government public consulting, my freshman year, sophomore year, financial analyst at eBay, so very typical finance, Excel, every day, all day. And then last summer, I was an SAP technology consultant at PwC. And I currently work as a growth analyst at 8 Sleep, which is an AI sleep fitness company, which is more along the lines of my passion in wellness tech. And I also just got an offer from Bain, so very consulting heavy so far. At my time during USC, I was in another consulting club, not Rise, but AIM. All the consulting clubs are amazing. If you're interested in consulting, join one. They are incredible. And then I was also in Marshall Women's Leadership Board, MWLB, which was a business group for women with a lot of speakers, and it was very networking heavy. I also would really recommend a sort of networking club within the industry that you're interested in. It's a great supplement to a typical more business or more robotics or whatever your niche is club. It's fun, and it's also you learn a lot and meet people. Yeah.
Okay. And for attendees, we'll be starting today in 1 or 2 questions. So get your minds rolling and think of some questions if you guys have them. It's for Daniel and Amelie. One of the things that we talked about earlier in the panel, but I'd love to get your guys' thoughts in is what are some things or skills that you guys developed early in your college careers that you guys have really felt like have helped you in your current job search and throughout the later stages of your college careers? We can start with Daniel if you're ready.
Yeah, I think joining my consulting club definitely provided a lot of different opportunities working with a variety of clients. And you don't have to join a consulting club specifically. You can go ahead and find your work elsewhere, just reaching out to local businesses, or if you want to create your own project as well. But I think specifically within my consulting club, we had a lot of opportunities for team collaboration. And a lot of these interviews, at least for the internships and even the full-time roles, they ask you, tell me a time when you've worked in a team. So that was definitely one of the experiences I think where being in a consulting club definitely helped me out. I think another time, and this comes up a lot in any sort of interview, they don't expect you to have too much hard skills coming in as an undergrad, but they want to see times where you've worked with data at the very least. So they ask you about a time that you've worked with data as well. So at least in my consulting club, I've had the opportunity to work with clients where they provided us with data, and we've been able to do some cool things such as regression modeling and coming up with data correlation models as well. So just small opportunities like those. And I think being in a consulting club at least made it really easy for those opportunities to come naturally.
Yeah, +1 on everything you said. So I'll say different things, but highly recommend everything that you just said. And also have gotten those interview questions like literally every interview I've ever had. I'll go more on the soft skill portion of this. I think within college, your best foot forward is networking with the Trojan Alumni Network. Everyone always says the Trojan Network is a thing. It totally is. And I think practicing networking from an early age, whether that be to try to get a job right now or just to practice, is huge. And that's something that I did starting freshman year, started reaching out to people on LinkedIn, cold reaching out, cold emailing, talking to recruiters I met at career fairs, just having those conversations that are more professional, whether they're coffee chats, like a casual setting, or like you're at a career fair with the recruiter and it feels a little bit more professional. Either way is super helpful because at the end of the day, everybody in an interview is going to sound the same because they've had very similar resumes. They've had very similar experiences. Like if you're going up against the best of the best, everyone's in a consulting club or whatever the club is that's relevant at their school, right? Everybody's had some type of research experience if you're in the medical field. So to stand out in an interview, you have to be a person they want to work with. And so that's all comes down to soft skills and who you are and how you can show your passion and how you can speak about yourself and be confident. And so if you've practiced talking to professionals in your industry about yourself and you know yourself really well and you're able to speak about everything you've done in an articulate way and in a confident way, that'll make you stand out more than anything. And you might not have the same exact experiences as other people, but if you're able to talk about what you have done very well, you can be even better than them. So I would say as early as possible, start working on yourself and being confident in talking about yourself, because that's a hard thing to do. Like not many people like talking about themselves, me included. So it's definitely something worth practicing.
Great. Thank you both for those insights. And that's such important knowledge for freshmen and sophomores to think about forward. My last question, as part of this moderated section, is for all the panelists. And if you guys could go back to your freshman or sophomore year, what would you guys do differently, and how would you? Is there anything else you would do differently, or anything else you would join to advance your careers? And we can start with McCarthy.
I guess I would say just everything I've said so far, but maybe starting freshman year would be a great time to just begin talking to as many people as possible, not being afraid to reach out to USC alum, even if you're a freshman. Um, because I really learned all of that along the way and stuff, but I didn't really start heavily networking until probably the end of sophomore year. And so, yeah, and then also trying to do a better job of having foresight over which clubs I was going to really stick with my freshman year, because as Divya said earlier, that like longitudinal aspect of being very committed to a club can later on be very important to you, and just like certain referrals or contacts that you need. And so I feel that I didn't really get super committed to any clubs until also maybe the end of sophomore year. And so just starting as early as possible with that can also be really helpful.
Yeah, I would say I'm like pretty satisfied like with my time at USC, but if I like had to go back and change something, I think I probably would have done like a PDP with Marshall. I was aware of the PDPs with Dornsife, but I wasn't super interested in like doing another science like master's when like already planning to go to grad school. So I think I didn't even know Marshall had PDPs until like my junior year, and it was like too late. So I think, I mean, it's okay. I'm considering like doing like the MD MBA program like here at Columbia. So I feel like just know that nothing's really the end of the world. Like you can always like pivot or like change what you want to do. But I would say like as a freshman, maybe like take that extra step to like know what resources are available to you, and like speaking to people in the fields you're interested in will definitely help with that to like let you know what's out there.
I can say that like I am very grateful for everything I did freshman year. I think I did everything right. And by everything, I mean I went to every session possible. The Career Center emails that you get every week that are really annoying, I would go to those sessions even if it wasn't super interesting, just in case. And I think that was a really good thing. So even if it's at night and you would rather be doing something else, like freshman year is the time to be getting as much knowledge as possible about like just general, let's say, for example, business or whatever industry it is that you're interested in. Because once you have that broad knowledge, then you can start focusing on, okay, what companies do I want to apply to? What people do I want to start reaching out to? So I think just doing the most is kind of what you should do your first year just to get a grip on everything. Something that I wish I would have known, I don't necessarily think I would have changed anything knowing this, but just something that I wish I would have known that it would help like peace of mind is that as a freshman, your age is actually like a huge advantage when you're networking with people and you say you're 18, 19, 17 years old or you're a freshman in college. Like they get so excited by that. And the younger you are, kind of the more opportunity almost you have to talk to people, just because they're probably going to be more willing to talk to you because it's more of a reminiscent type of age for them. Whereas if you grow up, you're similar to their age more so, and so they have kind of less grace with what they give you. And also as a freshman, like they don't expect you know anything. The fact that you're even reaching out or showing any initiative is like already so impressive because again, everything is compared to your age. So I would like take full advantage of being young and like shoot for the moon because you never know like what older person is gonna like be reminiscing about their time being 18 years old and like living the time of their life. I'm experiencing everything for the first time in college. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind and like don't be afraid to do things just because you're a freshman, because like it actually might be easier that you're a freshman to do things, contrary to what you might think.
Yeah, I just want to add off of what you said. I completely agree with you. My freshman and sophomore year, I leveraged my age a lot in order to get a lot of coffee chats um, at companies that I wanted to work with. And I think it worked out really well for me due to the fact that when you're reaching out during your junior or senior year, a lot of these people know that you're reaching out in order to try and get a company referral. It kind of seems like you're procrastinating on your networking at the time. So if you do it your freshman or sophomore year, a lot of the people that you're actually connecting and networking with see it as a genuine opportunity for you to learn about the industry and learn about what kind of their day-to-day and the responsibilities are. So they're a lot more willing to actually take these coffee chats, and a lot of them actually they celebrate and they kind of want that initiative from these underclassmen. So I would say that's a great first step. I think secondly, and I changed my approach into coffee chats during the later time of my time in college, but I think treating each coffee chat as just a regular conversation. I try not to plan any questions because it's hard to plan based off of not knowing anything about the person other than their LinkedIn, right? You know the name of their role, but you don't know what they actually do in their role, right? So coming in with an open mind, not really coming in with too many questions, treating it like a normal conversation, asking them about their day. I think the biggest question, not only during a coffee chat, but also during an interview that you can answer and ask as well is, how's your day going? And it's very easy to say, hey, my day's going good, and then moving on to the next part of the coffee chat. But that can also be the perfect opportunity for you to actually get to know the person on a deeper level, right? So if someone asks you about your day, you tell them that I always had a midterm, it was for macro econ, and then you bring up your professor. Turns out the person that you're coffee chatting had that professor as well. So that's just one way you can make a link. But there's a lot of opportunities within coffee chatting other than just professionally to get to know these people. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's all really great insights, and um, I wish I could go back to freshman and sophomore years to get coffee chatting with people earlier. One of the questions that we had from actually, let me introduce the student Q&A. So if any students have questions, you guys can raise your hands or drop a message in the chat. We'll get to your question. So actually, one of our attendees asked, how did the internships and experiences you had as an underclassman help you when trying to find a job? I guess anyone can answer if you guys have thoughts. Just feel free to jump in.
Um, One thing specifically for my case, and maybe for anyone who's trying to get their foot in a door in a new field, maybe that you don't have previous experience in is that like my junior year is when or during the internship after my sophomore year is when I decided I'd really like to try to like really get into business. And that's not at all my background, not my major or anything. And so in order to make myself applicable for that, to even get an interview in the first place, that involved like a lot of networking, as I had been talking about. But then in the interviews, I was able to like twist and like cater my experiences and my stories to apply that to like a position in consulting. So even though I was a student research intern at Barrow Neurological Institute, like I mentioned, I worked in this lab called the Innovation Center where we worked with neurosurgery residents to kind of enhance like surgical processes or flaws using new medical devices or things like that. And so when asked about like why do I want to do consulting, I was able to take that experience and say like what I did in this lab could be considered like consulting at its core. Like we took this problem delivered by a neurosurgery resident. They didn't know how to solve the problem, and so we would kind of brainstorm different solutions and like brainstorm different methods or processes that could ultimately deliver a solution. And at its core, like that's what consulting is. And so I think that no matter what experience you have, all are valuable, and you can really take those experiences and like just know how to kind of market yourself to whatever you're trying to get into.
I'll add on just from like a freshman perspective. Your resume is probably going to be a lot of high school. This is only if you're a freshman, by the way. Your resume is probably going to be a lot of high school stuff, and that is fine and expected. I feel like a question I get a lot is, what should I put on it if I'm a freshman? Like, it's okay if it's still your high school stuff. And if you have an interview or something and you're talking about your experiences as a freshman, and you can totally talk about the high school stuff, especially if it's leadership, if it's sports. Sports is something that people kind of overlook when they're thinking about like professional settings and interviews. But like, I still talk about the time I played club soccer for 12 years because nothing in my life has showed dedication more than that. And people are always impressed when I talk about it. And now I'm a senior and I haven't done that for a long time. So I think that you can totally leverage your experiences that you had in high school and over the course of your life, even if you were super young, in interviews, even if you feel like it doesn't relate at all. Like everything McCarthy has said is so true, especially in consulting. Like most people at these big companies didn't even study business. Like they like having outside perspectives. So I wouldn't be worried if your past experiences or anything that you've done doesn't seem to align to certain things. Like if you have an interest and you have a passion, it'll show as long as, you're able to connect the dots.
Daniel, do you guys want to add anything, or do you guys want?
Yeah, I can add like one small thing. I feel like at the end of the day, like everything is so intersectional. Like you're never gonna work in perfectly like one field. Like it's gonna be related to something else or a project that like is working with some other group that does XYZ that's like different than what you do. So I think like no matter like what your major is, what you're involved in, I feel like all of those experiences come into use and like teach you how to apply different types of knowledge like together. And like for example, I'm thinking of like McCarthy and me, we both seem to have like very similar interests, like health, technology, business, but we've approached it in different ways. And I think that's a really beautiful thing too, like knowing that all of your experiences are going to be fruitful and that you can approach your professional career in different ways is something that you should know will happen naturally, and to like don't stress out about that.
Could you repeat the question one more time, Alex?
Yeah. How did the internships and experiences you had as an underclassman help you when trying to find a job?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, at least for me during my internships, freshman year I interned at Hewlett Packard as for venture capital. And then during my sophomore year, I interned at a robotics firm as an operations intern. And through those experiences, I realized that those industries, although were fun, weren't for me. And I think that's also valuable experience that you can gain your freshman and sophomore year, especially as an underclassman. These internships, it's hard to get a lot of relevant internships, especially in the fields that you want to get into. So even just getting internships within fields that might seem of interest to you, but once you do your internship, you find out it's not what you thought it was. I think it's still just as much of a valuable experience knowing what you don't want to do, versus what you want to do.
Um, Ratchet, do you want to ask your question?
Oh yeah, thank you guys so much for coming on. I didn't come in expecting much, but this is actually really good information and advice. I had a question regarding coffee chats because I definitely resonate with the fact that informal questions like "How was your day?" leads to more fun conversation and more energetic ones. But so, what if you had to assign a percentage? So, what should be like professional questions versus just like fun, get to know the other person? What would that be? And maybe you could extrapolate this to office hours as well.
I can go ahead and answer this. I don't know if there's a percentage. I think it really does depend on the person that you're talking to. At least for me, I think asking how your day is like the easiest softball question. And if they go ahead and try and say something other than, oh, it's going well, how's your day going? At that point, if they seem interested and they kind of want to talk more about their day, then I can go from there and see how I can move the conversation into something that's a bit more conversational. But if it's something where I see that they want it to be more professional and they just want questions and answers, then I try not too hard to force a conversation to be made.
I can add on to that just because, Daniel, I completely agree. I don't think I've ever said good to any time I've been asked how your day is. Cause like mostly also in interviews, like that's the first thing they'll ask. But for a coffee chat where it's already more informal, like I love being informal. Like I'm super casual when I'm asking for a coffee chat, when I start talking to them, like drag on the conversation about the how is your day, if it makes sense. But then I think after that, like most of my questions I say would be still kind of professional leaning. I think the more casual questions in a coffee chat, especially if you're coffee chatting someone who's more of an associate level or like not super senior in the company, can be more about the day in the life questions. So you can really get granular with asking like, okay, like, are you good friends with your teammates? Like, is the culture there? You know, like, is that a fit that you feel for yourself? Things like that you wouldn't necessarily even ask a senior person just because it doesn't really feel right. I would say I'm more casual than with those people who are more similar to my age versus the senior people. And for the senior people, I think the casuality can come maybe less from the questions, but more if they ask you a question in your answer. Because if you answer it just super innocently, honestly, naively showing that you're young and just willing to learn versus a practice robotic answer, I think that will show that you're being casual and that it's a coffee chat and you're not trying to necessarily like act like an interviewer or impress them too much for it to be like an awkward vibe. So I think it depends a lot also on who you're talking to, but yeah, a good mix.
That was genuinely specific. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for your question. We also have a few more questions in the chat. One person asked, what should you say to maintain contact with people you network with, and how do you maintain those relationships um, throughout college?
Yeah, I can start off this one. I think obviously like it depends on like who you're trying to reach out to, but I think in terms of like my professors or even like somebody who's like a couple years older than me that's like my friend, but we like don't chat like regularly, I think an email here or there can go a long way, like wishing them for the holidays or like hoping they had a great start to the spring semester. I think those things kind of like show that like you're thinking about them and like you care about them, but it also kind of gets your email and like your name in their inbox and like they remember that. And like maybe if you're going to ask for like a letter of recommendation, like 2 years down the line, for example, like they kind of remember your name and like they know that you've like come by. So they're like more willing to be like, oh yeah, like I remember this person who like has been sending me these emails. Like one time a professor even sent me back their like family Christmas card with like pictures of their kids on it. And it was like really cute. Um, so I think that just asking them like how they're doing, if you're like on texting terms, like that can be really good. Like wishing them for their birthday, like all these small things that are super casual can definitely help with like mentors and like teachers, I would say, but maybe somebody else has like more to add for like the professional standpoint.
One thing I would also say is this is kind of a basic piece of advice, but after every coffee chat you have, if you initiated that chat maybe because you're interested in the company they're working at or something, or even just their field, then a great question to ask is there anyone else you can connect me with that like you think would be helpful for me to talk to? And maybe it'll be someone else within that company, and that's great for you because you're getting your name out there, talking to as many, like getting as many points of contact as you can in that company, and then or they might connect you with someone who like based off of what you're said, especially if you're like a freshman or sophomore and you're just really like talking about your interests and all of that and how they got to where they are, they might then have another valuable connection that they recognize could be beneficial to you. And so um, that is also a way to maintain contact with that original person because then maybe you'll talk with that next person, they'll send a good word back. So yeah, just using touching as many people, getting to as many people in the network as you can.
Awesome. Um, Another question that we had is, we talked a lot about how freshmen and sophomores can be in an advantageous position when asking for coffee chats, but Did you guys find it harder to find internships as an underclassman? And if so, where did you guys look instead of, I guess, the more difficult positions?
I can start with this one. Yes, I mean, bottom line, as a freshman, even a sophomore, like if you're looking at these big companies, most of the time the age requirement is at least a junior or a sophomore. So that can obviously limit your options, but I think there's two ways to combat this. Number one, a lot of these large companies, let's say consulting companies, for example, will have freshman specific programs. Sometimes they're diversity related, sometimes they're not. Those are the type of programs that you'll be eligible for, and you should totally apply to if you're interested in the company, because if you can get in super early, it makes it way easier to end up getting a job there later on. So that's one thing you can do, which I guess would be slightly easier because they're only considering other freshmen, so you're not up against anybody else. And the second thing you can do is like startups, random networking opportunities at random companies. My freshman year, I worked at Public Consulting Group, as I mentioned, which is a very large company, but it's not a big four, for example. So their application process was a little bit more haphazard and not as like streamlined. You didn't really necessarily need to like meet the recruiter beforehand. The way I got my job was literally just networking with people on LinkedIn. I didn't even know that PCG had an internship. I was just networking with one of the guys who worked there. And he was like, "You'd be a great fit for the internship." And I was like, "What internship?" And then he was like, "Here's the recruiter's email." I called her or talked to her, and she was like, "Okay, I love you. I want you, but you have to apply first." So I literally like kind of got the job before I even applied. And that's kind of a very typical, I think, of like a freshman sophomore role where you're networking first, you're going to the startups, you're going to Handshake or whatever it is to get the job first. So I think like you have to leverage a lot of outside opportunities because you might not be eligible, but I wouldn't let that deter you. I think you totally still could get an internship. You're just gonna have to try a little bit harder.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I had a similar story as well, where during my freshman year internship, I actually networked my way into more of like an informal internship. It was more of like a fellowship position, but that was something where the person that I networked with kind of made informally, just due to the fact that he liked me during the coffee chat. So I think networking, especially during your freshman year or sophomore year as well, can go a long way. I think what helped me a lot too, especially as a freshman sophomore, when I wanted to know like how to get into these different fields, whether it be banking, consulting. There's a lot of other fields out there, but as a business major, those are the things that are coming off the top of my head. But for me, at least, I had a lot of upperclassmen that I could look up to, specifically within the career paths that they took. So I would go ahead and set coffee chats with students also at USC as well, right? You don't have to network with just professionals, also students, especially seniors that have gone through that entire process and have a lot more free time now are a lot more willing to help. And even if it's someone that you're not too close to, I think reaching out to them on LinkedIn or even just looking at their LinkedIn to see, hey, how did this guy work his way up from working at a startup to eventually working at a big four to now where he's working at a large company? Something along the lines of that. I think looking at other people's LinkedIn and getting inspiration of, hey, this is the career path that they took. Can I take something similar? Or at least this is how I understand is one way of getting to the end goal that I want to get to.
Awesome. Another one of our attendees asked a question that Divya or McCarthy might be able to answer better. Um, is there any advice you guys have for getting into research and where should someone start?
Um, I was just asked this question the other day, and I remember like it was my freshman year, first semester, and I had heard that a lot of people were like doing research in labs and stuff, and I wanted to get involved. So at the end of first semester, I knew like I wanted to get involved second semester, so I wanted to start in a lab in January. And I emailed probably 30 professors, and just like for various labs and stuff. And I had to like continue to follow up with them because, and I don't blame them, they're very busy and they don't want all these random freshmen, like they don't want or need all these random freshmen working in their labs. So I followed up with a few, and out of those like 30 that I probably reached out to, I probably got like three responses back. And then like I interviewed with a couple, but the interview was like very informal, just kind of like talking about your availability, your interests. And so that's how I ended up getting one. But also, some people form like a great connection with their professor or something and you end up working in their lab, there are a lot of ways and opportunities to get your foot in the door. That's what I did, and I have heard that's like a common thing is just emailing a lot of professors. But Divya, you might have more to say on that considering you probably maintained your lab position longer than I did.
Yeah, I think my path was like really similar too. But I think even before that, like thinking about like your interests and like, what parts of science do you like? Like, do you like neuroscience research? Like, do you there's like so many types of labs doing like a wide variety of things, ranging from like wet lab and dry lab and like engineering related things, like clinical things. And I think like there's a lot out there. So I think kind of reflecting internally about like, okay, what am I looking for is like a good place to start. And like, do you have the time for this? I also started out by cold emailing people. I would like most labs like have a website. I would like look through the directory at like, I don't know, like in the certain department, I would like pull up the lab website and I would like read through the website, read some of the papers that they have on there. And then I would like cold email being like, hey, like I read this paper, like I thought it was really interesting, blah, blah, blah. Like I saw you have this project. Like, are you like looking for like an undergraduate researcher? Some labs also have like actual applications. I feel like those are less like formally published. So I feel like upperclassmen often like pass it down or say that there's like an open position. So I think talking to people is like really great too. I also emailed like about 30 professors and I heard back from like two after a lot of following up. And the first one was like very enticing because I was like, like this is the first lab that like got back to me. But I ended up like saying no to that lab because of like how much like they wanted. They were like, every summer you have to work 40 hours a week until you graduate, and every week you have to work 20 hours a week during the semester. And I was like, oh, that's kind of a lot. Like I don't know. And it was kind of hard for me to say no because I was like, this is the first one that responded. But the second one that responded ended up being like phenomenal with like amazing mentors, like such a great community. And it was like 10 hours a week, which is like much, much more doable in addition to like all the other clubs and stuff. I loved it and I stuck with them like all throughout like senior year and like even the summer after I graduated, I like finished up a project with them. So that's kind of how I got there too. And I think it's like yeah, that was kind of my path.
Yeah, I think you guys have shown a lot of fortitude and perseverance in finding those research positions. So the next question, I'm actually gonna combine a few questions and ask about going back to coffee chats and first of all, like did you guys do a lot of them in person or on Zoom? And then um, how do you bring up the fact that you're interested in opportunities um, and relatedly, how do you bring up the fact that you might want a referral from this person and what's the best way to go about that conversation?
I think if you're talking to at least associates or analysts, people that have gone through the process, especially recently, they know why you're coffee chatting them. They know like you're also there to learn a lot about the role, but at the end of the day, they also know that you're there just in case to ask for a referral. So at least a lot of the times when the coffee chats went well for me, they would go ahead and ask me like straight up, by the way, is there like anything you need? Do you need me to refer you to a position or anything like that? I know for a lot of the larger companies, they have incentive programs. So if the employee that referred you, if you end up getting an offer and accepting the offer, the employee gets a bonus of a couple $1,000s. So there's incentive for the employees as well. So there's that for sure. I think if they don't naturally offer it to you, I think depending on how the coffee chat went, you should go ahead and ask. I think uh, it doesn't hurt to ask, even if the coffee chat didn't go too well, because at the end of the day, there's so many people within the Trojan network that you can reach out to. But I think just sending a follow-up email within a week or two, or maybe once, keeping in touch with them until the referral or until the position actually opens up, is definitely helpful.
Yeah, agreed with that. Also to answer the other part of the question, I have never had a coffee chat in person. And yeah, so then going on what Daniel said, I think the best way, if they don't offer it already, the hands down best way I found to ask for a referral is not to ask at all. It's to ask, at the very end, I would say only if the conversation went well, because I don't know, it's just so awkward if it didn't. And I would assume I don't think of conversations that ever went poorly for me. Like, yes, you get along with some people better, but unless you say something insane, like I think the conversation will have gone well. Is to, at the end, thank you so much for your time. Like, I really appreciated this chat. I was just wondering, if your company does referrals. Because if you ask that question, like they're only going to answer in one of three ways. Number one, no, we do not. Okay, great. So then you don't even have to ask them for a referral because there's no point. Number two, they're going to be like, yes, we do, and I'd love to refer you. Like they're going to tell you, or they're going to be like, yes, we do referrals, but I don't feel comfortable referring you because I don't know you that well, or whatever the case is. Like they will always follow up with the yes or no of whether they're going to refer you. And this way you're not actually just asking them for a referral, because that feels like too much like asking them for something. Whereas if you're just innocently asking the question of whether the company does referrals, it kind of comes off a little bit better. So I would recommend doing that if you do feel like you want to ask for a referral at the end.
Additionally, I think this question really shows the ROI on your time of like investing your time in making these connections early on, like freshman and sophomore year, because then maintaining those connections, it becomes like very, very natural to ask for a referral when it is time to apply to jobs and stuff like that, because you're not it sounds like you've really maintained that connection and you're not just talking to someone for the motive of getting referred to this company, and then like they'll feel much more they'll just be much more likely to like willingly write you a nice referral.
Awesome. Um, and then our next question is from Nancy, and she asks, how do you learn how to market yourself to the best extent, building strong resumes, etc.? Are there any ways that you guys have marketed yourself and made yourself more visible to recruiters or employers, and how do you guys gone about that?
um as I mentioned before, like, and speaking from my own experience, um, I feel that I had to like do that heavily to get into the consulting world, because like there was nothing like on my resume or like just classes that I'd taken that made me directly like applicable to that field, and so it really involved marketing myself. And one like tangible thing you can do is actually go to the career fairs, I think, and this isn't always going to like make the connection that you need, but for me it did. For the internship I did last summer, I met the recruiter for the consulting firm at the USC Career Fair, and then because like that made me no longer just a resume or a piece of paper, like I actually met him, that kind of like I was able to go up to him and be like, I applied to this position at your firm, and then that like humanized me, and so I met him, and then he really like saw that I maybe would be good for that job, and then he referred me, and that's how I got that job.
Great. Do you have anything to share about marketing yourself for grad school or med school for students?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say like in terms of like applying to grad school, I feel like your personal and like story arc is like really important. And I feel like that could be applicable to anything, like an interview, or like at like a company or firm or something else too. But I think like seeing how your experiences have built on one another and being able to like draw like a story and a line between all of those that like bring you to like where you are right now. And like we're all an accumulation of our experiences, and that's why we're interested in going into the fields that we want to. So I think like being able to trace that narrative for yourself, and obviously like when it comes to an application, like write well and like share that story in a way that's meaningful will be super important. In terms of like the resume, actually, like contrary to popular belief, sort of like you do have to submit a kind of resume applying to medical school. Some schools ask you to like you fill out your activities list, but you also upload your resume. So I would say have other people look at it. Like have upperclassmen look at it, tell you to like reformat it. And I think like sometimes resumes can tend to look like really boring and all the same. And for certain fields, like that's pretty good. But I think like having other people give you feedback and like even if it's a little bit out of your comfort zone can be really good. I like totally revamped my resume before applying to medical school by talking to somebody who is like more into graphic design, and I like really loved it. So I think don't underestimate the power of like the visuals of it too. Yeah.
Um, we're gonna wrap up with one last question, and then we'll have some announcements at the end. Um, one attendee asks, what's a normal time for setting up a summer internship? You guys can go through like networking to applying and then interviewing.
I think this depends heavily on your industry, but starting with business, which I think by far is the earliest, it can be up to 2 years in advance, like kind of insane. But I think normally, if you want an internship for next summer, it'll be the fall before. So applications will open summer, early school starting from July to September timeframe. The applications will be open for the following May summer. And so the networking should almost take place the year before or the semester before. That's why, like, if you're a freshman now, start talking to people that you might want to intern with their company like the following year. Networking also should just be happening like 24/7, like regardless of when the applications are, I would say. And then interviewing usually would happen in the fall. So like October, maybe September to November, but October I would say is like the main one, at least for business. And I know like at least my friends in journalism and entertainment, that I think is the other end of the extreme. Like they get jobs in like April or May for literally May. So I wouldn't be scared if you feel behind or anything. If you're not in business, like you're not behind, applications probably haven't even opened yet. But in business, that is something you definitely need to keep in mind, especially if you have target companies like big consulting companies, banks, like go right now to their website and figure out their timelines because you need to be so in advance for that. You might be recruiting for a following junior year internship, like the beginning of your sophomore year. So literally over a year in advance, and you don't want to miss that. Another way to do that is just talk to the recruiter and have them tell you exactly like when you should apply for things. That's what I did for PwC, and it helps a lot because I got my PwC internship for after my junior year during my sophomore year spring break. So like a year and 3 months before. So like that's insane. So just keep it in mind.
Daniel McCarthy, have you guys had similar experiences with your internship searches?
Yeah, I would say looking at the job postings, even if you're a freshman or sophomore, just looking at the job postings for junior year and full time, just so you kind of get an idea. For the most part, those dates are probably not going to get earlier or be moved just because they're so early already. And kind of planning, I guess, your resume behind all of that. So I know at least for like banking, Amelie kind of talked about this, but banking recruits like sophomore first or second semester. So you really only have 3 semesters before you start recruiting for your junior year internship, which goes to your full time as well. So you kind of have 3 semesters to work with in order to fill up your resume with all college level experiences. So I know for consulting it's a bit later, so you have a bit more experience. And this varies by industry, so just kind of make sure that at least for each summer or each semester, what are you trying to get out of that? Whether that be an internship, whether that be a work study job or a job on campus, whether that be creating a project, or if you're someone more creative, if you want to work on a portfolio, or create a short film. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but just making sure that you're using your time, in order to showcase skills that you've been able to learn while you were in college.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add from what's all been said, but yeah, it's very like conditional based on the field you're in, and I think you can gather insight also from talking to people who are in positions or have had positions that you're interested in, because sometimes like a job, especially with internships, it's not always, especially after like freshman or sophomore year, it's not going to be a formal program like it might be after junior year, and so you'll kind of gather insight on those types of opportunities that exist just simply through talking to people. And then you can always ask about their like recruiting timeline and what that looks like because it'll be different for everyone. And some of those opportunities might be a little more discreet because it's mostly for people who have kind of like networked their way into that. So, again, I just think talking to people always um, goes such a long way.
Great. And then Divya, would you like to share the med school application timeline?
Sure. I know that's like kind of like a long way out for people. But if people who are like trying to apply straight through, so you're like not taking any gap years, you technically submit your application like May of your junior year. And then you finish like that's like your primary application. And then you finish up your secondary applications probably by like the summer into fall. And then you typically spend fall to like the following spring like interviewing. And then you matriculate the fall after. So for example, like I applied right after I graduated because I was taking one gap year. So I applied spring 2024 and I started school fall 2025. It's kind of just like a longer application process for medical school, I would say. I think other grad programs run more similarly to like undergrad applications like fall to fall. So definitely, like they said, like research your timelines, like talk to people who are like in years above you to get their advice on like when to start, how to prepare, and like when you should be prepping your application prior to submitting it.
Great, thanks for that insight. So that'll wrap up our Q&A portion of the panel. Just some final announcements before we go. We will be having more industry insights panels. These are all designed for undergrads looking to explore various career paths. You can see our events on Handshake. All the descriptions will be there. Internship SC is another one of our initiatives where we produce internship timelines and recruitment advice by industry, and these are led by students for various industries. And then networking events. Students can have the opportunity to join a lot of networking events. We have the grad school fair coming up. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Just follow your Handshake, look at your emails. Those are all great places to, find opportunities and continue to grow your career trajectory. Yeah. So with that being said, thank you everyone for coming.